Good morning, dear students of class 12. I welcome you all to your economics class. So students, till now we have covered two topics from this chapter, economic reform since 1991. First, we discussed about the background of the economic reforms. That is what led the government to introduce the new economic policy. So we basically came to know that during the period of 1991, India suffered from a situation of economic crisis. There was a burden of national debt, and the burden became so high that it became difficult for India to pay even the interest. The foreign currency which was available with India was not enough to even meet the expenses even for 2 weeks. And students, then what happened, the expenditure of the government went so high that it became more than the revenue of the government, and as a result the government had to resort to borrowings. The prices of the domestic products became exorbitantly high. There was literally zero export, and then the PSUs were running under losses. So students, under such a circumstance, no country was willing to help India. So having met with such a crisis, as a last option, India approached the IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is the present day World Bank and IMF. So after so much of negotiations, IBRD finally agreed to give a loan of 7 billion US dollar to India, but in return India had to agree to certain terms and conditions. That is, India had to open up the economy, India had to remove the various trade restrictions, India had to reduce the role played by the public sector, and so and so. So students, India, since had no other option, India agreed to all the terms and conditions, and these led to the introduction of the economic reforms of 1991. Since India agreed to all the terms and conditions, and as a commitment to all those terms and conditions, the entire scenario of the Indian economy was changed. So students, the first policy reform of the economic reform was liberalization, which we discussed in our last class. So students, what is liberalization? Liberalization basically means the relaxation of the various rules and restrictions which were imposed on industry and trade. One of the very essence of the reform liberalization is the abolition of the industrial licensing policy. So students, with the adoption of a liberal policy, India was able to change the scenario of the industrial sector, the financial sector, then the fiscal reforms were also there, then trade and policy reforms were also there, then foreign exchange reforms were also there. So students, liberal policies were adopted in all those sectors. So today we are going to discuss about the second policy reform which was initiated under the new economic policy, that is privatization. And after privatization we will be discussing about the third and the last policy reform which was initiated under the new economic policy, that is globalization. So today our topics of discussion are privatization and globalization. So students, the learning objective of our today's class is to understand about the other two reform measures which were adopted under the new economic policy of 1991, that is privatization and globalization. So students, what is privatization? Privatization refers to the withdrawal of the government from the ownership of public enterprise or from the ownership of government owned enterprise and giving it in the hands of public or to the hands of private individual. So privatization basically is done in two ways. First, students, sometimes the government might sell the ownership of the public enterprise to the private individuals, that is outright sale of the government enterprise to some private entities. And secondly, the government sometimes withdraws from the ownership or management of a public enterprise and instead gives this responsibility to some private entities or to the public. So in this way privatization is undertaken. So students, sometimes what happens, some share of the government owned enterprise might be sold off to the private entities. So that particular policy is known as disinvestment policy. That means the government sells off a certain portion of its share of the government owned enterprise to private individuals or to public. So that process of selling shares or selling equity of PSUs to the private individuals or to the public is called disinvestment policy. Okay, and students, this disinvestment policy or program started in 1991-1992, and it's not that the government has only sold off equities of those PSUs which were running under losses. Even some PSUs which were making quite a huge amount of profit, such PSUs were also privatized using this disinvestment policy. So students, some of the profit making PSUs which were given the status of Navaratnas. So such PSUs which included BPCL, that is Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited, HPCL, Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited, ONGC, Oil and Natural Gas Corporation Limited, then SAIL, BHEL, NTPC, BSNL, IPCL, IOC, such Navaratnas which were making quite a good amount of profit, such PSUs were also privatized using this disinvestment policy. That means when disinvestment is done, it does not mean that the entire government-owned enterprise has been sold off to the private sector or to private entities. Rather, it means that some portion of the share has been sold off to the private entities. Now, there will be a mixed ownership of both the government as well as the private entities. So, this investment policy basically refers to selling off some portion or some shares of equity of the government-owned enterprise to the private entities, such that there will be a mixed ownership or a joint ownership of both public and private sector. Okay. Need for privatization. So students, why was privatization so much of important? As I have already told you that by the period of 1991, most of the PSUs were literally running under losses, but then also they were not shut down because it was a question of employment of a huge population, isn't it? So it was not very easy to shut down a PSU even if it is making loss, because most of the PSUs which were run by the government are driven by welfare motive and not profit motive. So even though, so that is why what happens, even though they are making losses, it is not very easy to shut down a PSU. So what happens if a PSU is making loss and even then it is not shut down, it kind of becomes a dead weight for the government. It becomes a burden for the government. It becomes a liability for the government. So most public sector enterprises which were running under losses became a social dead weight for the government. Instead of making any profit, it was turning into a burden for the government, and mounting losses to PSUs became unsustainable. To a certain point, those losses were bearable, but students, beyond that particular point, these losses became unsustainable or unbearable. Okay, and then most of the PSUs were characterized by inefficiency and incompetent management. Rampant corruption was there, and so privatization was considered as the only remedy or the only solution to these problems. So students, owing to all these problems or difficulties associated with the public sector enterprises, this decision to privatize the government owned enterprises was undertaken. Okay, and then students, the next or the third important policy measure which was initiated under the new economic policy was globalization. So you probably have already studied about globalization in your class 10, isn't it? There was a chapter on globalization. So globalization basically means opening up the domestic economy to the world economy, such that there will be no borders, there will be no barriers. The main idea is to turn the entire globe into one village. Okay, there will be free flow of goods and services, there will be free flow of people, there will be free flow of ideas. So free interactions will take place. There will be no borders, no boundaries, no restrictions, no barriers. So globalization refers to the integration of the country with the economies of other country, which results in the free flow of goods and services across borders. And students, if we see from a much broader perspective, globalization not only leads to the free flow of goods and services, but it also leads to the free flow of people, free flow of ideas, free flow of technology from one country to another. So globalization indicates increasing openness. Every economy is open to the other economy. Growing economic interdependence, that means all the economies will now become mutually interdependent. Interdependent as in the form of imports, in the form of exports, and deepening economic integration. Harmonization will be there. Then the diplomatic relations will increase among countries, isn't it? So the main idea of globalization was to strengthen the relationship among the countries to make the world one global village, such that there will be no barriers or no restrictions. Okay. And then students, one very important concept which is closely associated with globalization is outsourcing. So as I have already told you, if we see from a broader perspective, globalization not only refers to the free flow of goods and services, but it also refers to the free flow of ideas, free flow of people, etc. So student, nowadays if we see around, we will see lots of people who are working abroad. Initially, before globalization, it was not possible. So now the scope of working abroad, the scope of getting education from abroad has increased. Outsourcing of people has become possible. So what happens if a multinational company which is based on USA feels that they should hire people from India, they can easily do so. So what happens? Outsourcing of people has taken place. Outsourcing of knowledge has taken place. Outsourcing of intelligence has taken place. So students, what happened? Nowadays, if we are sitting at home and if I want to take a class from one of the renowned professor from Oxford University, I can easily do that sitting at home. How? Through the use of open education, through the use of distant learning. So all these things have become possible because of outsourcing, and outsourcing is one of the very important consequence or outcome of globalization. Okay, so it is basically a process wherein a company hires regular service from external sources which was previously provided by the internal sources, or which was previously acquired from within the domestic territory. So previously everything was very limited, knowledge was limited. That means if someone is very intelligent and that person wants to go and work abroad, that facility or that provision was not there. But nowadays everything is possible. If you do not like to work here, you can go abroad. If you do not like to study here, you can go abroad. So lots of facilities have come up, lots of scope. Nowadays the world has a greater scope compared to what was there before. So this has primarily happened because of globalization. So India has become one of the favorite destination, or you can say India has become the hotspot for outsourcing. Why? Because of the availability of English speaking youth and skilled labor at cheaper rates. So students, in India, since the population is very high, the manpower is also high. Human resource too is very high in India. So owing to this increased population, India has an advantage of manpower, isn't it? Even though the other countries are technologically advanced, but when it comes to manpower, India is the most strongest country. Why? Because the population of India is so high, and if we utilize this population in an efficient manner, this population can turn into an asset for the country, can turn into valuables for the country. So students, India has become one of the very important or very favorite destination for outsourcing because of, first, the availability of English speaking youth and skilled laborers at much cheaper rate. So sometimes if a US company wants to hire people at cheaper rates, they can easily hire from India because of the huge source of manpower which is available in India. And then students, another reason is the growth of the IT sector, the growth of mass media, the growth of communication, the growth of technology. Okay, so students, outsourcing has resulted in legal services, customer care, banking services, or even teaching, which are being outsourced by developed countries to developing countries like India. Free flow of knowledge, free flow of people, free flow of ideas have taken place. Cultural exchange have taken place. Educational exchange has taken place. So students, globalization is a very broad concept. Okay, the scope of globalization is never ending. Okay, globalization has huge impacts on each and every aspect of life of people. It has impact on industries, it has impact on the society, it has impact on education, it has impact on trade, it has impact on finance, it has impact on the personal lives of the people, etc., etc. And the students, one of the very important organizations which promote globalization or which promote free trade among the countries is GATT. GATT means General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. So students, GATT was basically established in the year 1948, and when it was established there were only 23 member countries under GATT. So students, GATT was basically founded in the year 1948 with 23 countries as its founding members to administer multilateral trade agreements. So those countries who are member of GATT, they have to sign agreements, trade agreements. And then students, this GATT was later on replaced by World Trade Organization, which was established on 1st January 1995. So India is also one of the members of WTO. So WTO is one such international organization which promotes free trade among the member countries by removing all kinds of restrictions. Also, it imposes restrictions on its members so that they cannot impose any type of trade barriers. Okay, so India was one of the founding members of WTO. So in order to keep its promise, or in order to keep its commitment which was made with the IBRD, India has removed the various quantitative restrictions on imports and exports. The various policy strategies promoting globalization of the Indian economy. So students, in order to promote globalization, various policy initiatives were undertaken. So the first policy initiative was increase in the equity limit of foreign investment. So initially, how much was the foreign investment limit? Initially, before economic reforms, it was 40%. But then after economic reforms, it was increased, or it was raised to 51%. But students, currently it ranges from 51% to 100%. That means if it has even increased. Okay, so the percentage of foreign investment has gradually increased from 40% to 51%, and now it ranges somewhere in between 51 to 100%. And then students, second initiative was partial convertibility of Indian rupee into another currency. So what is partial convertibility? That means we can sell Indian currency to have foreign currency. So this is basically done to import goods. So if I want to import goods, I will have to pay in terms of foreign currency, right? So what happens? Indian currency can be sold in return for foreign currency. So to promote globalization, to promote free flow of goods and services, this provision has also been made available, the partial convertibility of Indian rupee into foreign currency, that is through the sale and purchase of foreign currency. And then students, some long-term trade policies have also been undertaken, that is the removal of trade barriers, then the control on foreign trade. Okay, that word is on, okay, and that was a typing mistake. Okay, so control on foreign trade. Then reduction in tariff. Tariff means the tax which is imposed on imports and exports. So in order to encourage trade among countries, the various restrictions have been removed. For example, tariff have been reduced. Then withdrawal of quantitative restrictions since 2001. And then students, since 2001, the various quantitative restrictions which are imposed on imports and exports, for example, quota, which prescribes the maximum limit up to which people can export or import, such type of quantitative restrictions have also been reduced since 2001. So students, this type of policy reforms has been initiated in order to promote globalization. Okay, So students, today we have discussed about privatization and globalization. So privatization basically means shedding of the ownership of government from the public, from the government owned ownership, and giving the ownership to some private entities. So it can be done in two ways. First, outright sale of the government enterprise to some private entities, and second, withdrawal of the ownership or management of the government and giving it in the hands of private individuals. And then another important term is disinvestment. Disinvestment basically means selling some part of share or some equity of government enterprise to private enterprises, such that there will be a mixed or joint ownership of both public and private enterprises. So this disinvestment program was basically initiated in 1991 and 1992, and after that many PSUs, even those PSUs which were not making losses, which were making quite a high profit, were also privatized using these disinvestment policies. So students, the next was globalization. It means integrating the various economies of the world by removing the various barriers or the various restrictions. Okay, so globalization is basically promoted by one international organization, that is WTO, which was initially known as GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. And these are the various policy measures or strategies which were adopted in order to promote globalization. The foreign investment limit was increased, then the provision of converting Indian rupee into foreign currency was also made available, then removal of restrictions on import and export, then tariff was reduced, and the various quantitative restrictions were also reduced. Okay, so students, I hope you all are clear. In case if you have any doubt, do let me know and I'll surely help you. Okay then, thank you, take care and stay safe.